In this episode of the JurisMondus podcast, the role of education in today's legal world and why it needs to change. Hello and welcome back to the JurisMondus podcast, where we talk about the law and we talk about the world and we try to learn about both. Now this week's topic came to me from an email that I received from a listener, Andy. And Andy writes, "Dear JurisMondus, I'm in the penultimate year of my law degree and I feel like I'm learning the wrong stuff. I know how to sue someone in 73 different ways under Australian law, but the firm I want to work at does mergers and acquisitions for Chinese businesses. Why on earth doesn't my law degree help with my chosen career path? Exasperated regards, Andy." So when I read this, I thought it was such a good question, thanks Andy, on such an important topic that a lot of my viewers can relate to, that I thought it was a good idea to do the whole episode on this question. So that's what we're going to do. Today, we'll talk a bit about what legal education has always had to do, and then we'll talk about what it has to do in the modern world, and how it should change to create good modern lawyers. So, let's get started. Legal education has always had to do two things. It's had to teach you the substantive law, the law of the land, and it's had to teach you how to think like a lawyer. Now, back in the day, it was really straightforward to teach the substantive law. You could rely on the priestly 11, the 11 subjects that give you an overview of the Australian legal system. You could expect that all of your clients and all of your deals would be all Australian, so all you needed was Australian law. Of course, in the modern world, that's not enough, and as we move into the future, the priestly 11 is going to become entirely inadequate. As lawyers, globalisation is upon us, like it or not. And that applies whether you're Andy, who wants to work at an international firm, or Nicole from last week's podcast, who intends to work as a small-town sole practitioner, but is going to have clients who need to organise probate with some relative who lives overseas. And so our legal education system needs to give lawyers the ability to handle international clients, even in a domestic context. And the question is, how? Now, the leading report on the internationalisation of legal education in Australia is the Bentley and Squelch Report. I'll link it in the description, but the long and the short of it is that they provide a multi-stage approach of integrating international and comparative law into a curriculum. The trouble with the way Bentley and Squelch present their options, though, is that they deal with substance rather than skills. So whilst a unit on Chinese contract law might be useful when dealing with Chinese clients, that unit is near useless when a French, German or Japanese client rocks up on your doorstep. Being a global lawyer doesn't mean that you've memorised the contract law of two countries rather than one. It means that you have the ability to learn the law of any country that becomes relevant to your clients. So in essence, legal education needs to teach skills rather than substance. Whilst we still need to learn substantive law, everyone needs to know what a contract is, that law should be used more as a method of teaching the skills that people need to have. So you can use the skills and techniques you acquired learning contract law in Australia to learn M&A law in China when you need it. And what this would mean is that your contracts unit would put less focus on feeding you case law and more focus on reading differing types of contracts or teaching you how to find the law yourself. And that brings us to that second area of legal thinking, because that's how we use those skills. Law schools have always needed to teach their students to think in a way that best serves their role as a lawyer. That is, a skilled advisor who gets the best outcome for their client. And law schools have historically taught this through a very adversarial lens that focuses on the client's rights and obligations under the law, but not on their needs. The classic style, the Socratic method, has been heavily criticised in recent years in that it often leads to the bullying of students, and it falls apart when the law is unclear. But the most important criticism in today's discussion comes from a Professor Stephen Friedland of the Elon University School of Law. and he argues that the Socratic method kills creativity, and it's really easy to imagine how this would happen. When you have a problem question, Alfie and Bob have a property disagreement. Here are the facts. Advise Bob. The best answer is probably go see a mediator, maybe talk it out. But if you were asked this question in an exam, you'd be expected to delve straight into the legal issues, or you risk failing. And so you're forced to subordinate the best option for Bob and Alfie for the answer that's most legal. And that's not reflective of the real world. Chances are the best results for a client aren't achieved through a letter of demand. Law graduates should walk out of law school with a toolbox of different ways in which they can help their client. And that toolbox is what you should walk out of law school with. Not, as Andy so poetically writes, 73 different ways of suing someone. So the $44 question here is how law schools do this. How they go about teaching creativity and soft skills whilst still testing students' understanding of the law. Now, I believe the best way to go about this is a focus on practical skills through what's known as clinical legal education. And that's a system whereby students are put in a, so to speak, a real-world scenario, which may be fabricated or, actually real. And they're assessed on the success that they achieve for their client. And so achievement in such a system ties together the people skills of connecting with your client, the creativity of coming up with your own way of solving the client's problems, and the legal knowledge aspect of knowing the law so you can actually help your client. But the trouble with this as it stands is that universities that do this make it extracurricular, which means that only those students who already know about the need for these skills are the ones who are doing it. And the students who really need those skills aren't doing it. So my solution would be to make such scenarios part of legal assessment and thereby compulsory. So what this does is it shifts the focus away from rote learning of law and rigorous attachment to litigation and moves it towards that fundamental goal of helping your client. And that brings us back to Andy's original question. And what we can conclude from today's podcast is that the role of legal education isn't really to teach you banking law in China. Sorry, Andy. It's to teach you the skills necessary so you can learn it for yourself. And right now, legal education just doesn't do this enough, and it needs to make some tough decisions to reach that demand. And that is it from me today. I'll catch you next week on the JurisMondus podcast. See you soon.